the part of your brain that produces and the part that edits are separate. And if you get them both operating at once, like you try to write the perfect sentence, let's say, then they interfere with each other. You can't produce and you can't edit. So you want to separate the production function and overproduce, and then you want to edit. And that sounds like exactly what happened to you when you were going through the first rough drafts of the movie. But obviously the gold was there.
Yeah, that is what happened. I think it's also, you're trying to figure out, what exactly is this thing? What is it? And in particular with Am I Racist, that was a major question. I mean, we had the question, as you point out, for the title that determines what we're exploring. But then there was the creative question of what kind of movie is this exactly? And I think with the first cut, we had something that was sort of straddling the line between a more traditional documentary and something that was a bit more sort of gonzo and Borat and performative and comedic. And that was the problem with the first cut, is it just was, it wasn't one thing, but it wasn't the other. So it didn't have the best elements of either of those things. And so we thought, well, how do we need the best elements of one of them. And what we decided ultimately was we could kind of pull this back a little bit and make it more of a traditional doc, or we could go farther and make it more of a comedy, make it more of a film. And we decided the second option. And we even went out and filmed more stuff. We had a couple of other ideas for scenes that we said, okay, if that's what this is going to be, if this is going to be not a traditional documentary, we got to go all the way. And we went out and filmed a couple other scenes just to build out that aspect of the film.
Yeah, so this character that you are in the movie is someone who's everyman naive in a way, right? I mean, what you're doing, at least to some degree, is asking stupid questions. And I used to encourage my students, by the way, in my seminars to ask stupid questions, assuming they were paying attention, right? Because if you have a question and it's a genuine question, the probability that 80% of the people around you have the same question is very high. You know, assuming you're paying a certain amount of attention. And so you have this character, and correct me if I have any of this wrong in your estimation, who's butting his head up against what a very large number of people seem to presume is self-evident, but is actually preposterous. And you allowed the people that you were talking to in both cases to put their foot in it, so to speak. And so I'm curious first if you think that's a reasonable characterization of what you're doing, but then I'm also curious, you play a kind of, it's like a Bugs Bunny character in a sense. Like there are these trickster characters in mythology that are troublemakers because of their, what would you say? Yeah, it's like the kid who says the emperor has no clothes. And so you're playing that, and you're playing it with a comedic edge, and it can also be pretty harsh. Are you surprised that you ended up in the domain of comedy, that you ended up making movies, that you ended up becoming, I mean, you're a documentary star now. What do you think about all that? And do you think that was a reasonable characterization of what you've been doing?
I think it's a reasonable characterization. Yeah. Well, it's the first time I've gotten a comparison to Bugs Bunny, so that's a new one. But I'll take it. And I think Emperor Has No Clothes. Certainly, I think that's very much what we're trying to do, especially with the first one, but with both movies. I think that's just a lot of what I do in general is pointing out the obvious. And maybe that's a conservative function. I wonder if that's a conservative function, pointing out the obvious. I think it is. And if we lived in a culture that was not perhaps not hopelessly, but was not deeply confused about so many basic things, then I might be out of a job entirely, which is fine. I'll go do something else, even though I'm not qualified for anything else. So I think that's an accurate characterization. I did not expect, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I didn't think that I'd be out making documentary films. being involved in doing something comedic, doing comedy, doesn't surprise me. I think that probably surprised other people who'd been watching me more than it surprised me. Because I know I have a sense of humor, and that's how I like to approach things. But the problem is that when you're doing, in particular for me, when I first started out podcasting, there's always the risk of, with political commentary, whether it's podcasting or cable news or anything, with political commentary, there's always the risk of it being entirely humorless. It's hard it's hard to involve humor in daily political commentary, and so it gets very dry, very kind of scolding and boring, frankly, after a while. And so I think especially early in my kind of commentary podcasting career, I think I was falling into that. It just wasn't funny. It wasn't fun. And so I was looking for ways, like what are some more interesting ways to get these same ideas across instead of just staring into a camera and saying it. And that's where
you don't want to underestimate the utility of wit and play. You know, when I was lecturing at Harvard, I lectured about very serious topics. You know, I mean, the most serious topics that I had encountered. You know, political catastrophe, atrocity, authoritarianism, brutality. You know, and I had this little voice in the back of my head all the time that told me that if I was a real master of that, I would be able to do it with a light touch. And I thought that was pretty preposterous when talking about things like the Soviet atrocities, you know. But what I came to realize over a very long period of time was that if you're a master of something, you do it in a spirit of play. And that play gives you some leeway, because that's partly what play means. But it also means that you have that leaven of wit that stops you from being a scold. You know, when I first encountered Rush Limbaugh, this is quite a while ago, 30 years ago probably, I went down to California, and that's where I first heard him. And I knew a little bit. I knew about the fact that he was a conservative commentator and that he was causing the progressive types a fair bit of misery and grief. But you know, when I first heard him, I thought that he was essentially a comedian. And there isn't a more effective mode of social commentary, I don't think, than comedy. That's partly what makes Rogan so effective. And it's also so surprising, you know, if you think about it, how many of the top-rated podcasters were stand-up comics. It's a lot of them, right? Constantine was, Dave Rubin was. There's a lot of people. Theo Vaughn, obviously. Joe, of course. So there is a real art to bringing in the right amount of wit and play. And that seems to be one of the reasons that your documentaries were so successful. I mean, you're a funny kind of comedian because you're kind of poker-faced like Buster Keaton, you know? You're not tremendously animated and extroverted. And Buster Keaton was absolutely remarkable at that. I mean, he kept a straight face no matter what he was doing. And that's also a funny part of the character that you play, because your facial expression is generally pretty flat. And that, I think that amplifies the absurdity of the situations that you put yourself in. And I'm kind of also curious with regards to the absurdity of those situations. Is I tried to put myself in your place when I was watching your movies, and I thought, Jesus, I don't think I could have done that. I don't think I could have stood the social pressure and the, what would you say, the contempt, that was directed towards you by these ideologically addled neo-Marxist, postmodern, progressive types. But you seem to be able to withstand that with no problem. And I'm not sure exactly why. How do you manage that?
I think I have the advantage in those encounters because it is awkward and it's often unpleasant, as you would expect. I think as any human being who's not a total psychopath would be uncomfortable in a lot of those kinds of situations. The advantage that I have is I know what we're doing and I know what this is for. And so I just have that in my mind the whole time. Like, we got to get the footage. Here's what we need out of this scene. And that's how even though it's a documentary, we're approaching all these things as this is not a segment of a documentary. This is a scene in a film. And So I know generally what we got to get out of it. I don't know exactly what they're going to do. So I don't know. We don't know precisely what the scene is going to be, but we know where we want to put this in the film and what we want to get out of it. And so knowing that allows me to endure these really intensely uncomfortable situations, because all in my mind, I'm only thinking, this is going to be great for the movie. Oh, that was a trailer moment. You know, in the moment while we're doing it, I'm thinking like that'll go in the trailer maybe. And I don't know, it just helps me kind of psychologically get through it. The point is, if there was no camera there and it was not a performance, and I'm sitting in a room, for example, with 10 people, I'm not going to stand up and call attention to myself and make the situation awkward intentionally. I would not do that.